In this video then we're going to have a look at When We Two Parted, probably my favourite of the AQA poetry anthology by Lord Byron. So to start off with, this poem is written from Lord Byron's perspective. It is actually the poet and not a persona talking. It begins, when we two parted in silence and tears. So start off by looking at parted. It's in the past tense, okay? And in silence and tears reveals to us that actually that this was not a good parting, okay? It's obviously very upsetting. Silence and tears means that they're not communicating, and obviously the tears implies a degree of upset as well. So obviously Lord Byron is particularly upset by this parting. It moves on to say half broken-hearted, which is interesting because only half of the couple are broken-hearted, which kind of implies that, seeing as he's the one who's writing the poem, he's the one that is half broken-hearted. Half of the couple is one person, and he's the one that is broken-hearted. And afterwards he mentions then to sever for years. So they split up, and they won't see each other for years, is what he's implying here. He moves on then, he says, pale grew thy cheek, and colder thy kiss, which means that there's no life in it anymore, just like there's no life in their relationship. So there's a lack of emotion from her, which means that she probably no longer loves him, or is no longer showing him any kind of affection or emotion at all. Moving on then, truly that hour foretold sorrow to this. That hour back in the past foretold sorrow to this hour when he is writing. So essentially he's saying that this hour back in the past essentially has informed all of his future hours, and that he's been miserable and sad ever since they actually parted way back when. It moves on to say, the dew of the morning sunk chill on my brow. So we've got a little bit of pathetic fallacy here. Dew of the morning, this dampness of the morning, sunk chill on my brow. He's feeling cold basically, and it's this kind of damp and cold foreshadowing to say that he's going to be miserable, just like he was miserable then. He's going to be miserable in the future, or miserable in the present once he's writing this poem. He carries on to say, it felt like the warning of what I feel now. So again, he's bringing us to the present, saying essentially the weather that day is essentially a warning to what he feels now, and that damp, cold dew is what he feels now. Basically, he is as miserable as the weather that morning, definitely. Moving on then, he says, thy vows are all broken, and there's an ambiguity to this line. Vows, what vows? Did she promise him something, or did she promise somebody else something? And perhaps he's implying in this case that her wedding vows are broken because she is cheating on somebody else with Lord Byron, this affair that they are having, which is actually the case. So the person that he's writing about is actually a person called Lady Frances Webster, and she is having an affair with Lord Byron. That's what he's talking about, and her vows, her vows are broken. But maybe the vows that she made him, maybe she suggested during their relationship she was going to leave her husband for him, and those vows are broken also. Afterwards then he says, thy vows are all broken, and light is thy fame. And this word light is positive, okay, and it suggests that her fame, her reputation is light, it's positive. Nobody knows about this dark secret, this affair, this idea that her vows are broken, and so maybe Byron is somewhat bitter that her reputation is unstained, that essentially she, with her reputation, basically is enjoying a good reputation, despite the fact that she has done something terrible, such as breaking her vows and having an affair, even if it was with Lord Byron himself, the person that is writing this poem. He continues to say, I hear thy name spoken, and share in its shame. So when he hears her name in society, when people are talking about her, he feels ashamed of what he's done. He feels ashamed of this affair that he's been having with her. But despite all of that, light is her fame. She hasn't had any bad reputation, anything like, she hasn't had any consequences as a result of the affair because it's remained in secret. Moving on then, it goes, they named thee before me. And it's interesting it says they, it's very vague in this case, but he's probably talking about society, maybe his friends, the people that he keeps company with. They named thee before me, so they name her before him, and he calls it a knell in mine ear. So whenever he hears her name, it's like a knell in his ear, and a knell would be a funeral bell, the bell rung at a funeral, and so it's almost like another death every time he hears her name, and he's mourning the loss of their relationship every time he hears her name. he continues to say, "A shudder comes o'er me, why wert thou so dear?" And so you've got this interrogative, this question here, which essentially is questioning himself about how much he loved her, and it captures his despair, basically. And he really, really did love her, or so he's saying, and he's despairing the fact that he ever found her so dear, so lovely, basically. He moves on to say, "They know not I knew thee, who knew thee too well." So the people that he talks to didn't know that Byron knew her, that he was having an affair with her, and he knew her too well. So the relationship in this case is suggesting that basically they've crossed boundaries because he knew her too well. He shouldn't have had that kind of relationship with this person, this Lady Frances Webster, and people didn't know about it. Afterwards then he says, "Long, long shall I rue thee." And you've got this repetition of long to say that essentially he's going to feel this regret for such a long time. And rue does mean regret, basically. Too deeply to tell, so he's going to regret it too deeply. He can't even express it in words. That's how much regret he's going to feel about his relationship with her. At the top here then, in the fourth stanza, it says, "In secret we met, in silence I grieve." And it's interesting here then, we've got the change in pronouns. In secret we met, so it was the two of them. They were both complicit in this affair. But now he splits off and he says, "In silence I grieve," not "we grieve, I grieve," to say that the pain, the emotional pain, is only suffered by him. And so it's interesting that he thinks that he's the only person that was affected emotionally by this affair. He also changes his tense. In secret we met, past tense. In silence I grieve, to present tense, which means that he is still feeling pain about this relationship. He's still upset about this, the ending of this relationship. He moves on to say that thy heart could forget, thy spirit deceive. And so the idea that she deceives him, or maybe deceives her husband, brings out this sense of bitterness from Lord Byron. He is really bitter about the idea that she broke it off and she could deceive so many people at once, her husband and him as well. Afterwards he moves on to say, "If I should meet thee after long years, how should I greet thee? With silence and tears." So we're going into the future now. We're speculating about the future. If he were to meet her after long years of them being apart, being separated, how is he going to greet her? Well, it's going to be with silence and tears. Nothing's changed. He's still upset. So at the start we've got past tense, and then we have a little bit of present tense all the way through, and then he speculates about the future as well, which is important at the end. And you've got this repetition of with silence and tears. So we have silence and tears in line 2, and then silence and tears at the end of this fourth stanza here, which suggests that nothing changes. We've got this cyclical structure. He is always going to feel pain and remorse and regret about their relationship, because he was always going to love her despite the fact that she has deceived him. Now, when it comes to this poem, it's interesting in terms of the context, and I think this poem has some of the best context of any of the poems. So in the AQA anthology, it doesn't actually give you the whole poem, and the reason for that is the fifth stanza of the poem actually reveals who the person was, and he couldn't publish it, because if he did publish it, then it would have ruined her reputation, and he would have faced some kind of legal charges, basically. It would have damaged both of their reputations for having an affair, and so he doesn't actually do that. So interestingly enough, we've got the publication date for this poem is 1808, but he actually wrote it in 1813, and the publisher was the one that changed it, and it was to keep the identity of the person that he was having an affair with secret. There are plenty of unpublished lines. There's basically a final fifth stanza in the poem, and we'll have a look at that very shortly. And he actually revealed this fifth stanza in a letter to his cousin Lady Hardy, which was dated in 1823. So we do have a letter which actually confirms the fifth stanza of this poem. He writes to his cousin, he says, "I had the melancholy task of prophesying as much many years ago, in some lines of which 3 or 4 first stanzas only were printed." So here's the confirmation that 3 or 4, in this case 4 stanzas were printed in this poem, and that they actually got rid of the final stanza. He writes it for us here. It says, "Then, fare thee well, Fanny, now doubly undone, to prove false unto many as faithless to one." So, Fanny is the pet name for Lady Frances Webster, the person he was having an affair with, and it's the parting again, fare thee well. Now doubly undone, to prove false unto many. So the idea is that she's proved false unto many, probably her husband, and also Lord Byron as well. And then as faithless to one, the one could be her husband, or it could be Lord Byron himself. He continues to say, "Thou art past all recalling, even would I recall, for the woman once falling forever must fall." The implication here is that she has fallen, she's a fallen woman, she's had an affair, and then forever must fall, she will keep having affairs, basically. And actually, in reality, she does as well. He's right about that. Afterwards then, in that letter it says that, here we are. "So here is a treasure for you in honour of our relationship, rhymes unpublished and a secret into the bargain, which you won't keep." So, Byron had written this poem about Lady Frances Webster. He writes this letter with the final stanza to his cousin, Lady Hardy, and he knows that she will not keep this secret, basically. He knows that she's going to reveal the secret, and so that will actually destroy Lady Frances Webster's reputation, finally. So the idea is that Lord Byron is very bitter about that relationship, and he's trying to get back at Lady Frances Webster for upsetting him so dearly in his past.